Assalamu alaikum, and it's a privilege to be here and certainly an honor to be a participant on this august panel, so thank you for having me. It was so exciting listening to Dr. Atta talk about the possibilities of the future and technology, and Andas, on your enthusiasm for Pakistan is also so infectious. And when I think about how much is possible with what they've talked about in terms of human capacity building, leadership, we also have to see that we're not seeing only possibility but peril. And so what I really want to talk about right now is the big changes that we're seeing in the world, and how what we need is to innovate in finance like we've been innovating in technology, and undergirding it all with what we call moral leadership. These are questions I've been thinking about my whole life. In fact, I started my career on Wall Street in Latin America during a financial crisis in the early 1980s. And I saw how finance was such a powerful tool, but that markets alone too often overlooked or even exploited the poor. And so in 1986, I moved to Rwanda in Central Africa, and I helped build that country's first microfinance bank with a small number of women founders, one of whom was a woman named Felicula. She was a nun, a Catholic nun. She also happened to be one of the first women parliamentarians in the country, and I loved her. But one of the first acts that she tried to push forward with fearlessness was to abolish bride price, and that was too much for the status quo. So a few days after pushing the policy, she was killed in a mysterious car accident. And I saw the terrible price that individuals who really push can sometimes pay. However, the bank flourished until the Rwandan genocide. And that was a time when I saw how easy it is for demagogues to rise in times of great inequality and instability. How they can prey on fear and cast blame on a particular group, the other, make them the other. And so I was determined after those experiences that there had to be a better way, that if we were going to solve big problems of poverty, we couldn't just use the simple tools of the market, nor just the simple tools of top-down approaches to government or charity, which too often create dependence. But we had to understand that poverty was about more than income. It was about dignity, opportunity, the ability to change your own life, human flourishing. So in 2001, we started Acumen with this center idea that we call patient capital, this notion that we could take philanthropy and invest it as equity in loans in entrepreneurs who were daring to go where the markets and the government weren't, where they were falling short in all of the basics: healthcare, education, agriculture, energy. We would keep our capital in those companies for 10, 12 years if necessary. And we would accompany the companies by injecting human capability, talent, leadership. And then we would measure our impact as well as our financial returns. Any money that would come back to us, we would reinvest in innovation for the poor. And over the last 15 years, we've invested about $106 million in about 100 companies across the world. And we've seen those companies, in turn, go through many ups and downs, but ultimately reach about 200 million individuals with critical goods and services, raise another $500 million into those enterprises. But make no mistake, it wouldn't happen if we didn't have the philanthropic, flexible capital to make those investments in the first place, because these are often places where markets don't exist, not for the poor. So an example would be in alternative energy. 1.5 billion people, even today, have no access to electricity. 133 years after Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. That is not productive, it is not healthy, it is not just, and it is dangerous. So 10 years ago, there weren't really market solutions for an alternative. But yet we took our patient capital and we invested in two guys out of Stanford Business School who had a solar lantern and a dream to eradicate kerosene. And it's been a long journey, 10 years, $5 million. We had to invest often when they were at the bottom of their own business to bridge them through difficult times. But today that company has brought clean electricity and light to almost 70 million of the world's poorest. And it's a profitable company. This is what we're hoping to do. That enabled us to then learn what it would take to build an entire sector. In that 10 years, we also invested in another $20 million in other kinds of solar companies, including Nizam here in Pakistan, which is doing incredible work in the off-grid space, particularly in Punjab. I visited a household in Kushab, and if you want to see dignity, there is nothing like watching a family turn on a switch and see lights and a radio and a fan come on for the first time in any generation. The work that we did in off-grid enabled us then to work with governments in Rwanda and Kenya, East Africa, to build a for-profit fund where we are trying to prove that off-grid, particularly for Africa, can be faster, cheaper, and more effective than reaching the grid, than extending the grid. This is the kind of innovation that's needed in the world. But we need to innovate financially, and we need to invest in entrepreneurs and help them take their technologies to the poor. We've been working in Pakistan for about 16 years, and it's been an incredible privilege for me to meet some of the most amazing entrepreneurs in the world. We've invested about $16 million in 16 companies. They also have leveraged about an additional $200 million into those companies and reached about 20 million individuals. I think about Roshani Zafar, who I'm sure many of you know in Lahore. We first invested in Kashif Bank in 2002 when there were 6 branches and 11,000 clients. And we helped them grow to about 300,000 clients. But Roshani doesn't stop innovating. And so a couple of years ago, she came to Acumen and said that she wanted to build a loan product to help private schools improve their infrastructure and train the teachers, improve the quality. And already, it's not been very many years, they've reached 1,000 schools and almost 100,000 school children. This is the kind of innovation that we need to see. I see Shoaib Sultan and Rashid Bajwa, who took NRSP's model, moved to Balwapur to create first a nonprofit agricultural finance bank for some of the poorest farmers, and then worked with Acumen to convert that bank into a for-profit concern that I think has about 4 billion rupees of turnover just this year, changing the lives of farmers. We expect to get our money back, as we said, in multiples. I think of Javad Aslam. Now, he's a Pakistani American who came to Pakistan in 2004 and also apprenticed with the great Tasneem Siddiqui, who had really figured out the model of incremental housing in Khuda Ki Basti in Karachi. Well, Javad took that model into Lahore, and then he had the daring to build an affordable housing community for low-income people outside of Lahore. Again, it took a long time. It takes a very special entrepreneur, and I dare say leader, because he had to fight bureaucracy and corruption and sabotage. And yet, just recently, we've been repaid twice our money. 4,000 people not only have houses, but community. And they've just raised another $20 million to expand this model across Pakistan. That's the promise of investing in entrepreneurs that are focusing not just on a single stakeholder, the shareholder, but are looking to solve some of the country's biggest problems. And there's more than that, because to make these companies work, you have to invest in talent and not just invest financial capital. So over the 10 years of working with Javad, we also supported him with 5 or 6 fellows who worked a year at a time. And then other fellows within Acumen worked with AMC. And now those fellows are taking the values and the lessons of the housing into other enterprises that they are starting both inside Pakistan and around the world. We have a fellow, Irfan Kashabji, in Nairobi, who's building an affordable housing program for the poor. And Javad is on his board. So that there's an opportunity here, if we want to talk about leadership and capital and innovation, to take the best of Pakistan's models and export them to. That's the promise. But as I said, it doesn't happen just with capital alone, and it certainly doesn't happen with only traditional financial capital. We need to raise a pool of philanthropic backed capital to take more bets on young entrepreneurs that have the dreams and the visions to change their country, but don't have the access and don't necessarily have a commercially viable plan as of yet. That's why we don't only invest in companies, but also leaders. And what's more than that, moral leaders. Because I've come to believe not only do we need moral leadership in the world, particularly now that we have to navigate across all of these stakeholders, that we cannot build companies anymore focused on just one shareholder. We have to think about the environment. We have to include the poor. Inequality is one of the biggest issues that we face. So what do we mean by moral leaders? We mean people who are willing to take on the status quo, that have that kind of moral courage. People who have the humility to recognize the world in which they are living and dealing, but the audacity to imagine something different, and then the resilience and grit to go build it, and to fight corruption and bureaucracy and complacency. We see these young fellows in whom we are investing really struggle with a long loneliness often, because they see their peers sometimes rising through the ranks through easy judgment, easy decisions, to status, income, and these ones keep taking the hard road, doing what's right, not what's easy. We've invested in about 400 young leaders around the world, over 90 in Pakistan, and they are beautiful. They're the treasure of this country. I think of Faisal Khan, who hails from Peshawar, who went to Harvard and got his PhD in biotech, but came back to Peshawar to create what he calls Peshawar 2.0. Because he said, I'm tired of the way my city is branded. And he wants Peshawar to be branded and known for innovation and technology and fashion and design. So he's already working with 13 universities across Peshawar, and he's building awareness, training young people, telling them it is okay to experiment and to fail. And as he's gaining momentum, he's also building an incubator. We need to support this and take the best of those young people and help them build the companies of the future. And then we need to celebrate them as role models. I think of Shamim Akhtar, who was born in a little village outside Mirpurkhas in rural Sindh. She came from an incredibly conservative tribe, and no girls in the village had ever gone to school, but she had a very progressive uncle who at age 2 months decided to raise her as a boy. Dressed her as a boy, sent her to school as a boy, and she went to school all the way through matriculation. Right now she's working on her PhD, but not before going back to the village and ensuring that every girl now is going to school. And she wants to make it her life to bring education to young women across Pakistan. She's another one that deserves our credit, our investment, our support. And from Lahore, Qasim Aslam, also someone who could do anything, but is building something called the History Project, where he's teaching empathy and critical thinking to school kids across Pakistan, and looking at Pakistan in connection to the rest of the world. And finally, Sarah Khurram, a young doctor with children, who is frustrated that so many women doctors stop practicing once they get married. And so she's building a company that employs women doctors and allows them to reach rural women through telemedicine. It's an early stage company as well, but it promises so much opportunity. And so our hope is to not only grow a pool of capital, but grow a pool of leaders and enable them to support one another, and then support them, and as I said, highlight them, because that is the promise. That is where we will make the most change, is in this idea of moral leadership. And if that sounds idealistic, I'm increasingly convinced that idealism is the new strategic, because we are so yearning to believe in goodness again, and it exists. When I ask people to name moral leaders anywhere around the world, many people just shake their heads and they can't come up with, certainly not political leaders too often. But if we're honest with ourselves, all of us can think of some, certainly in our personal lives. And a couple of years ago, when we were first presenting this off-grid program to President Kagame in Rwanda and his ministers, I was honestly feeling a bit weary, wondering what I was doing back in Rwanda. And suddenly a young woman came up to me. She was wearing a blue suit, and she said, "Ms. Novogratz, I think you knew my auntie." And I said, "Really? What's her name?" And she said, "Felicula." And I burst into tears and I said, "I haven't heard her name in so many years. It had been 30 years. And she said, "Yeah, I grew up hearing stories about her." And in that moment, I understood that I was back in that country, simply carrying forward the work that she had started but couldn't be completed in her lifetime. And that for us right now, in this moment of peril and possibility, it is to us to take on the problems that are so big, we may not be able to complete them in our lifetime. But it is to us to do the work and to inspire the next generation to carry it forward. But if there is ever a generation that can do it, it is ours and the next. We have the tools and the technologies, the imagination. We, however, need to solve not just our material impoverishment, but our spiritual impoverishment. If I have learned anything, it is that to disrupt systems, we have to start by disrupting ourselves, and to change the world, we have to start by changing ourselves. I have been deeply changed by the entrepreneurs and the young leaders, the fellows I have met in Pakistan, the partners who have made this work possible, who do it day in and day out. I'm deeply appreciative. I am deeply excited about the future, but it will not happen without all of us changing the way that we do business. And so I wish you all Godspeed, and I'm so excited for this conference.